All right. Good morning, everybody. All right, so I'm going to start off with a joke this morning, and I'm going to have some congregational involvement for this joke, okay? So everybody's going to help me with it. You ready? Knock, knock.
Who's there?
Interrupting cow.
Interrupting
Moo! What just happened?
You said knock knock.
I did. I said a knock, knock joke. And then what did I do in the middle of the knock, knock joke? I interrupted you because I was what? I was an interrupting cow going moo, right? So I interrupted you. So my question today is, have you ever been interrupted before?
Yes.
Yeah? Yeah, I have too. So being interrupted, if you didn't know, means that when you're maybe talking or maybe when you're doing something, all of a sudden, something else happens that takes your attention away from what you were doing. So sometimes that happens when we're talking. Like, have you ever been telling somebody about something and then someone else comes in and starts talking and interrupts you?
Yeah.
That has happened to you? Yeah? Is that happening? You got show of hands out there. Have you ever been interrupted before? Yeah, I think it's pretty safe to say that everybody's been interrupted. So it can happen when we're talking, but it can also happen when maybe we're doing something. Like maybe we're working on a project, or maybe you're like having some screen time at home, and then your parents come up and they're like, hey, it's time to get ready for bed, or hey, it's time for dinner, and then you have to stop doing what you were doing. Has that happened to you before? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and so we all get interrupted at times. And so, you know, sometimes though, we're the ones that do the interrupting. Have you ever interrupted somebody before? Oliver says yes. The rest of you are like, But I think if we were to ask your parents, have you ever interrupted your parents before? I think parents would be like, yes. Yeah, I see a lot of heads, parent heads going, yeah. Yeah, so there are times where sometimes we are the ones that interrupt other people. I think we all have, and I think if we were to ask the congregation out there, by a show of hands, have you ever also been the one that interrupted somebody else? Sure. Show of hands.
Mommy.
Oh, I see some people that didn't raise their hands, which is impressive, because I'm pretty sure that we've all interrupted somebody before. Everybody interrupts other people, and we all know what it's like to be interrupted. And in our gospel story today, guess who gets interrupted? Jesus! How did you know? Were you paying attention? Yeah. So, yeah, Jesus gets interrupted, not once, but twice in our gospel story today. And sometimes when we get interrupted, sometimes we notice it, and sometimes we just kind of ignore it. And so Jesus has two options today in our gospel story. Do you think when he's interrupted, do you think that he can pay attention to it, or he can ignore it? Which one do you think he does? He pays attention to it. And so I'm gonna tell you a little bit, I'm gonna walk you through that story real quick one more time. So in our story today, Jesus is teaching to a large group of people all about God's love. And as he's doing that, another leader of the synagogue, which is kind of like a church, came up to Jesus and interrupted his teaching. And so Jesus could have ignored that interruption, but instead Jesus listens to this interruption. And he finds out that this leader has a really, really sick daughter. And he's hoping that Jesus can come and heal his daughter. And so Jesus, allowing this interruption, then stops teaching the crowd and then follows this leader, his name's Jairus, to go heal his daughter. So that now Jesus is walking down the street, following Jairus to his sick daughter, and the whole crowd is following Jesus. And as they're following Jesus, the crowd gets kind of excited, and they start to pass Jesus. They start to walk faster than Jesus and the disciples are. And so Jesus all of a sudden kind of ends up in the middle of the crowd. And they're walking down a street, and there's a lot of people. Have you ever walked down a street with a lot of people? Have you, like when you do that, you kind of bump into people all the time when you're walking around, right? So people are touching each other, bouncing off each other. They're walking, they're all excited because they want to see what Jesus is going to do. But then all of a sudden, Jesus stops walking with the crowd, and the crowd stops too. And he stops because Jesus noticed that some of his power had left him because he felt somebody touch part of his clothes. And he asks everybody, "Who touched me?" And the disciples are like, "Jesus, everybody's touching you. We're in this big crowded street. We don't have anywhere to go." And Jesus stops and says, "No, somebody touched me who needed some of God's love and healing." And so what he ends up finding out was that there's this woman who just wanted to touch a little bit of Jesus' clothes so that she could maybe heal herself, because she had been sick for a really long time. And what ends up happening is that just by touching Jesus' cloak, Jesus stops and is interrupted on his way to go heal someone, and Jesus ends up healing another person. And so Jesus has now been interrupted twice. And now he continues on his way after that interruption, and he goes and ends up healing the daughter eventually, and so ends up healing two people. But on the way, Jesus was interrupted twice in this story. So instead of getting frustrated by these interruptions or ignoring these interruptions that happen to him, Jesus pays attention to them and treats these special moments like holy interruptions instead of just regular interruptions. And so today, we are called to kind of do the same thing that Jesus does. Anytime that we're interrupted, we're called to try to take a step back and not get frustrated, not ignore it, but to view it as a chance to see God at work around us, and to view those interruptions as a holy interruption. So our good news today is that all of the times that we're interrupted, which can happen a lot, today we're reminded that if we take time to see God at work around us, that those interruptions can actually maybe be holy moments that allow us to share God's love and healing with other people, just like Jesus did today. So with that, I'd love for you to repeat after me in prayer. Invite the congregation to join as well. Dear God, thank you for Jesus. Help us to remember that even when we get interrupted, that you are at work in the world, and that interruption can become a holy moment. All we need to do is pay attention. We love you. Amen. All right, thanks for coming up, everybody.